When we moved to San Diego County in 1970, it was a little hunk of paradise. It was agricultural fields, there was a stream, there were lots of hiking trails. You could take your dog for walks unfettered. In fact, at the time, in the early 70s, it was more rural than this Carmel Valley is currently, but that all changed really fast. And that area was just prone to overdevelopment, leading to the kinds of sprawl and traffic conditions, air quality conditions that we see there now. Topographically, biologically, the areas have much in common. I think sociologically, there's a real difference between Southern California and Central California. We all know that, and you can really appreciate that difference when you contrast what's happened to the two Carmel Valleys.
What is now the Carmel Valley Ranch was my grandfather's ranch. That was 560 acres of beautiful flatland ranch. There was alfalfa on one side of the ranch road leading to the ranch house and cattle were on the other. That was the essence of Carmel Valley. Carmel Valley was a very, very quiet place to be. Almost always in a state of meditation. It was just so quiet. But there are some very incredible sights and sounds out here in the Carmel Valley, and I and CVA and a great number of other people want to keep it that way.
World War II changed California forever. Servicemen bound for the South Pacific had enjoyed its special beauty and basked in its mild climate. So too had the waves of Americans arriving to take jobs in its booming defense plants. By the war's end, the Golden State had seduced millions. They were smitten, so smitten that they stayed. Or, like Americans before them, adventurers pulled up stakes and headed west. California became their new home. Yet the state grew so dynamically and so haphazardly that someone lamented that California was America's major environmental casualty of World War II. It didn't take long for the post-war boom to hit Carmel Valley. As the large ranches subdivided, housing began to spring up. Right away, Harold Sand and other residents could see what was coming. If unchecked, development would gradually erode the valley's natural charm and undermine its rural lifestyle. Before long, locals were keeping a close eye on county planners and supervisors. What they discovered spelled trouble. Developers, through their friends in county government, were obtaining exemptions to zoning regulations that limited housing density. In 1949, determined to preserve the valley, the neighbors officially organized the CVPOA, the Carmel Valley Property Owners Association. Its mission? To monitor development and other issues that could threaten the valley's character. They would also keep residents informed about similar issues headed their way. During its 7 decades, the association's numbers increased and its scope widened. It also dropped property owners from its name to reflect a more diverse, inclusive membership. Today, its mission remains unchanged. CVA fights the same battles as its founders fought 70 years ago, because pressures to exploit the valley's distinctive charm never cease.
And so you needed a group, and you still need a group like the Carmel Valley Association that defends the rural character, the quality of life of the place, to prevent it from getting overdeveloped with all the traffic and other problems that come with that kind of overdevelopment.
There are always forces trying to destroy the environment, not necessarily purposefully, but for their own personal gain. And generally, the people doing it don't live here.
Ironically, the very qualities that make the valley so wonderful are also those that make its preservation such a challenge. With the recent growth and rising reputation of its wineries, Carmel Valley has evolved into a major tourist destination. It's no longer a well-guarded secret nestled in the shadows of Carmel and Monterey.
Carmel Valley has become that hidden jewel that everybody wants to come to. It won't stay a jewel if everybody comes here.
One of its stellar moments occurred during the most recent update of the county's master plan for the valley. Through the efforts of CVA, the update not only established new procedures governing the process and approval of new development projects, it also capped the number of future valley housing units for 20 years.
We, as an organization, have to be the watchdogs to make sure that the general plan that we have, and we have a special one for the Carmel Valley, have to be on top of government constantly, because the pressures to develop, the money to be made here, exerts an incredible amount of pressure on local government officials to either ignore or reinterpret parts of the general plan, and following the plan frequently is subverted. And so we, as an association, have to monitor what our government officials do to maintain and adhere to the general plan, which is the public description and document of how we use our land.
We need the Carmel Valley Association to keep constant pressure on the supervisors, to meet with them, to point out through our expertise the concerns about the policies they're thinking of implementing, and also to hold their feet to the fire that they implement properly the policies that they have agreed to.
As we look for the kind of economic development that we need, we should base that development to support the things that we want to save, so that whatever businesses come in are related to what we do and can be done locally. We want to make sure that our mission, which is to maintain the rural character and natural resources of the Carmel Valley, is maintained. And so we look at whatever comes to us within that context. Our role is essentially, acting on behalf of people who live here and maintaining the quality of life that they have.
During the early 1900s, this was a summer retreat. The river provided fishing and swimming holes. Many of the houses along the river were originally summer cabins. It had its own unique environment because it was the Carmel River and has a really interesting history.
Geographically, the Carmel River runs 36 miles from the Ventana Wilderness to the ocean and the lagoon there. Importantly, it is the source of the water supply for the people, but also for the plants and animals that live here and give the valley its particular rural character. Many threats came to the river. The first, and not to be neglected, is the natural threat. There were repeated floods over the years, sometimes quite disastrous ones. Immediate current threat, and that's the way the river's been managed. The great threat there, it was the beginning of an over-pumping of the underflow, which began doing this at least by the 1960s and continued pumping to the extent that the deleterious effects began to appear with the trees and shrubs dying out, the river going dry during certain times of the year. The Carmel Valley Association has joined to bring pressure on the state to regulate the pumping and on the private water company.
CVA is interested in protecting the river from overpumping, as well as returning it to its natural state as much as possible. There are efforts to improve the natural state of the river, and there are efforts to increase the lagoon area, to increase the flow of the river into the lagoon, which has its own habitat value. And so all of those things are of interest to Carmel Valley Association.
So the question is, what happens next? How do we manage the ecosystem to continue the beneficial use of that by the ecology and the people of the valley? It is a fundamental concern of anyone who has a sense of stewardship for the valley.
The critical fight that Carmel Valley is in and day out is traffic. And the concerns I have about traffic are not only inconvenience, I'm concerned about the safety of all of us. What happens if you have to get to a hospital and you can't because the road is clogged? And as more and more development comes in, our rural roads will not be able to handle it.
We have various elements of the tourist industry, whether it's in a winery or a local hotel or so forth, increasingly having more and more events of, several hundred people coming sometimes for 2 and 3 days at a time, and an uncontrolled number of events has a very severe impact on the valley. The county needs to do a much better job of regulating the frequency and the time and the size of events and plan for them. Related to that is whether or not people can turn their homes into special event center. And then that brings in the whole issue of zoning and residential areas being used for commercial purposes. So we have to watch that very carefully to make sure that your neighborhood doesn't become another place for an event center, because all of that adds traffic to an already difficult situation.
I don't think the county recognizes the impact and the dangers of some of the events that are being permitted. We have a 2-lane road that is our lifeblood. And then you have an event, you can't move. It's a major problem because the traffic becomes totally unreasonable, but also we live in canyons. And when you have an event in one of these canyon bowls, every neighbor hears it. And so it's important that we come up with policies that make sure that traffic considerations and safety considerations come into play, and that the neighbors are not overly burdened. The county needs to step up and come up with really effective permitting process. Then they need to ensure that that process is followed. We need enforcement.
Short-term rentals is another item that is particularly difficult because it has impact of not only bringing more and more people in, but frequently they come for shorter periods of time, and it's having an impact on affordable housing.
Affordable housing disappears because now rental units aren't available for long-term rentals. People who want to live here and rent a house can't because they're being rented on a daily basis. Additionally, we have private roads, shared driveways, and some people are renting out 2, 3, 4 rooms in their house. People's quality of life are being destroyed. They're having to deal with the noise, with visual impacts, and we're not allowing for long-term rentals and affordable housing in our community. So it's important that we control it, that we make sure that this doesn't just become an Airbnb community, because then we're all going to have to move someplace else, because who wants to live in a hotel community?
I think the perception of CVA being against everything is understandable because we only have a chance to react to projects. Because we're focused on trying to keep it rural, it usually puts us in the opposition.
The major criticism of CVA and its allies that I've ever heard is that CVA is a bunch of NIMBYs, right? Not in my backyard. And I'm okay with that, because I think if protecting your quality of life, protecting the rural character of your community is an important ideal, it's an important value to you, you ought to be able to stand up and say, hey, maybe that looks good, but not this. You know, in response to the NIMBY criticism that's usually made by developers that want the community to roll over and play dead anytime they propose something, and the fact that there are a lot of people in Carmel Valley that have a backbone and say this is not appropriate for our community, or it might be appropriate but only with certain changes, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So I'll wear that proudly.
They say that history repeats itself, and I heard someone say that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I think there's great truth to that. It won't be the exact same fights going forward, but sadly I think it'll be similar fights, because the same motivations that are causing people to try to bring development into Carmel Valley are always going to be there.
So this is going to keep coming up in Carmel Valley in the future. It's going to be new iterations of that old problem in terms of development that then has traffic implications, water implications, air quality implications, school implications, etc. And so we're going to always be facing those issues. And again, the CVA plays such an enormously important role in educating the community and being vigilant about some of these more significant threats.
We are stewards of an extraordinarily special place. And as stewards, it's our responsibility to pass it on to the next generation in the same way.
Yeah, we all live here because it's so beautiful. It wouldn't be beautiful if it was all paved over. And unfortunately, not everyone can live in a place that has limited space and where you want to preserve green space. There's another Carmel Valley down next to San Diego that is just all pavement and all shopping centers and looks like any other development. It doesn't look like Carmel Valley. And I think if people could look at what the other Carmel Valley in Southern California looks like, that's what we don't want it to look like. We just don't want to look like another development.